tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Practicing the Dhamma is not something that is confined to just sitting on the meditation cushion. Dhamma is evident in, or should be evident at all times in all activities. Today we were working on the firewood, and thank you all for helping with that. And that led me to do some reflections on that kind of activity and the nature of it. It's not so traditional in India or Thailand, but in colder climates like Japan, the Zen tradition, it's a part of the life. And there's a well-known Zen saying, before enlightenment, chopping wood, hauling water. After enlightenment, chopping wood, hauling water. Which is actually a little bit humorous, but which like a lot of Zen, it has a deeper meaning, that the Bodhi mind, the awakened mind, is a potential, a possibility at all times, and the awakened being is not separate from the ordinary necessity of chopping wood, hauling water. There is some mention of firewood in the Pali texts. Not so much for heating, that's not really an issue in India, at least to any degree relative to here, but for cooking particularly. There's a story that has a very powerful teaching. The Buddha was sitting with the monks in a park, and he wanted to give a teaching about non-attachment. And he saw in the distance there were some people from the village were gathering firewood sticks, making bundles and carrying them off. And Buddha said to the monks, when you see those villagers carrying away the firewood sticks, taking them away from here, does that cause you distress and misery? Do you beat your breast and rend your garments and cry, oh, why are they taking the firewood sticks? Where are the firewood sticks going? The monks were kind of puzzled by this, and said, no, why should we care? It's nothing to do with us. We don't really, it's no cause for distress. And the Buddha said, remember that attitude, monks, towards the firewood sticks. That should be your attitude towards the body, towards feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. When change and alteration come upon these aggregates, you should have the same attitude of non-attachment as you do towards the firewood sticks being carried away. Firewood was also used, and it still is used in Thailand. Besides cooking, it's used in saunas or hot rooms for bathing. And it's actually in the Vinaya texts, there's various passages about proper etiquette in the sauna. Keeping the sauna clean and keeping it stocked and so on. And in the stories found, mostly in the Vinaya texts, but there's also occurs elsewhere, stories about saunas that would get occupied by a naga. Seems to have been a problem in ancient India, was the sauna would be taken over by a naga and people were afraid to use it. And then the Buddha or some other Arahant monk would offer to tame the naga. And there's a story that when the Buddha, this is probably the first instance of this motif, is when the Buddha visited the fire ascetics early in his career. This is his first big conversion, when he converted this community of fire worshippers to Buddhism. And when he arrived at their encampment, he asked if they could have a place to stay, and they said, the only place that's left that's open you could have is the sauna. You could sleep in the sauna, but I don't think you want to. There's a fire-breathing naga in there. And so that's no concern. And we went to the sauna, and overnight the ascetics saw the fire and smoke bellowing out of the windows of the sauna. And they said, oh, that poor monk who went in there, he's done for. That's the end of him. But in the morning, the Buddha came out, and he opened up his alms bowl, and he showed inside the alms bowl was a little snake all curled up. He said, this is your mighty naga, I tamed it. But generally, in India, there wasn't much conception of cold being a problem, and I think you see this in the Buddhist texts, that the metaphors and imagery that's often used about a peaceful mind is coolness. For people living in a hot tropical climate, the idea that it could ever be too cool doesn't really register so much. So in the Pali text, in the text about the hell realms, there are only hot hells. The Tibetans, who lived in, of course, in a much more harsh climate that has a real serious cold, they also have cold hells, where the suffering is by freezing cold. And Tibetan yogis didn't always depend on firewood to keep warm. There is a practice in Tibetan Buddhism of Dumo heat, where you raise up internal heat. And this is actually, I'm told, has been actually verified in modern times, that scientific observers studying these monks, that they're able to raise up their body heat to a degree to keep warm in freezing temperatures. The most famous practitioner of this was Milarepa. The name Milarepa means the cotton-clad one. And he would live in these caves in the Tibetan winter, dressed only in a thin cotton robe. And that's how he's called, the cotton-clad one. By raising up the Dumo heat, he would survive. He also incidentally went long periods of time without eating, living off prana. So what can we learn from chopping wood? Quite a bit. As analogies to the Dhamma. One very obvious analogy is to the law of karma. When we chop and stack wood in August, we don't need the heat now, but in January we're going to want it. So it's like making good karma. It doesn't maybe benefit you immediately, but you're laying up stores for future time. A foolish person might think, why should I make the effort to chop and stack wood? I'm not going to benefit from it. Some future me will benefit from it. Who cares about future me? Let him shiver. Likewise, you're going to have experiences in the future, and they're going to be determined by your actions now, what karma you are storing up now. Now, when we talk about past and future lives, rebirth, people often, particularly if they're kind of new to the idea, they're often fascinated to try and guess or figure out what was my past lives, where was I in the past, what kind of existence did I have. And that's really not of much value, because there's nothing you can do about it. That was done and gone. But it laid down the karma that you're experiencing now. And your focus should really be looking forward to future existences. And maybe make the mental exercise to try and imagine this life as a past life. What kind of merit are you laying down now? How will your future existence be harmed or helped by what you're doing now? Because it will be determined by it. Just as we lay down firewood in the shed, so that in the future we can enjoy the heat. So we lay down karma now, so that in the future we can experience good results. Stacking wood is also a very good illustration of the principle of attention to detail. You know, there's a art and a skill to making a good stack of wood that doesn't tumble over. And it requires attention and mindfulness at every moment of laying the wood. And the mental quality of Dhamma investigation of Dhammas, is illustrated on a mundane level by stacking wood. Dhamma is investigation of Dhammas, is actually intelligent curiosity. So when you do something like stacking wood, you learn as you go. You take an interest in what's the best way to make a stable pile, and what the qualities of different pieces of wood and the suitability for putting them in different places in the pile is a mundane expression of the Dhamma quality of Dhamma, which we should apply in our practice. Make your practice of your meditation interesting and apply curiosity and learning to it, so you can keep growing, keep adjusting your practice by the results. And firewood is a very good illustration of the principle of impermanence, of anicca, which is the changeable nature of all phenomena. The elements combining and then dispersing. When a tree grows, it's using the energy of sunlight to form a chemical reaction using carbon dioxide and water principally to make complex hydrocarbons that in a tree are the wood fibers. And these chemical bonds are activated by the energy of the sun in the process of photosynthesis. And the tree, while it's alive, is constantly changing. It's growing. Vegetable life is very slow moving relative to animal life, but it's still at a different pace. It's still moving and changing and growing in it, stretching its roots down and its branches up. And then even after it's dead, it still continues to change. The tree dies in the forest, then it becomes food for other organisms, fungi and insects, so on. But if it's cut down by humans for firewood, and it's changed again, and it goes through multiple processes from growing in the forest to when it burns in your stove. I've often reflected how many times a piece of firewood gets handled. From the forester cutting it down, loaded on the truck, they truck it here, it gets unloaded, it's chainsawed, split, thrown into the cart, taken to the shed, piled up, then eventually it's taken out, put in the stove, maybe chopped again and put in the stove. And once in a while you clean the ashes out of the stove, the small residue of the incombustible material that the tree had taken from the earth. And what's being released when you burn a piece of wood in the stove, you're breaking those chemical bonds and releasing carbon dioxide and water, and the energy that had been originally from the sun is released as heat. So you're actually experiencing stored sunlight, sunlight of several past summers. And all this time is constant change and the impermanence. You can see the impermanence in a woodshed is something like an analogy for human existence. At the beginning of the winter, the shed is full and neatly stacked, and it gradually diminishes. And then in the spring, it's empty and depleted, and there's just kind of rubble of bark and twigs laying around. So we see that impermanence in the nature of firewood. There's also the not self, or anatta, or insubstantiality. Because this hard, dense structure is of a piece of wood is really just built from carbon dioxide and water. And it has no real abiding essence of wood. It's just a temporary configuration of these molecules of water and carbon dioxide. And they have this intricate pattern, this sort of dance with the sunlight to create wood. And it goes back to carbon dioxide and water. So I think that's sufficient for just a few reflections on the Zen of Firewood.
Andamaya Dhammakataya Sadhukaram Dadamase.
Sadhu, 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 Namo Dhamma.